Coastal goals are some of my personal favorite. I think they're interesting, they're dynamic. Their goals, especially because of where we live in this amazing part of Oregon, that are really embedded in the development review that we do for the county in most of our permitting. They are also the goal elements that we refer to most often when we're looking at various types of development proposals. And that could be anything from single home construction to restoration projects. It could be subdivisions, bridges, and one of the biggest reviews we did that you guys are all familiar with is the Muskegon emergency egress. And so looking at our coastal goals are focused on our estuaries, coastal shorelands, and then coming up in future discussion would also include our beaches and dunes and ocean resources. So in Muskegon, what areas are we talking about within and around the community that these goals focus on? And those would be tidally influenced segments of Muskegon and Sutton Creeks, as well as the Salmon River. For estuary, and then for shoreland, it is the Muskegon Crest wetlands, it is Proposal Rock, it is the Cascade Head Scenic Research Area. So those are some of the areas of focus that really are part of your community or adjacent to your community that we take a look at. And so I'm going to be quick because there's some, again, these panelists are going to have great information to share with you. But just to kind of give you an overview of that. So our role in the county that is reflected through development standards and regulations really consists of categorizing, inventorying, and assessing our coastal resources. And so those include our estuaries and our coastal shorelands. And so what do? We have to assess their resource capabilities from an environmental, social, economic, and recreational standpoint, to name a few, and then really determine where within these resources is it appropriate to protect, conserve, and develop where appropriate. We have to look and anticipate impacts. We have to consider mitigation. Oftentimes, these development review processes include coordination with state and federal agencies or other local entities and departments within the county. These resources and how they can be developed or how they are protected through policies and prohibitions are carried out in the goal 17 and 16 elements of the comprehensive plan, and then also most often through the base zoning, which would be for your estuary zones, and then the overlay zones, which would be the shoreland overlay zone. Other overlay zones that have relationships with these two goal elements include hazards, most specifically flooding for the flood hazard overlay zone, and then as well as the beach and dune overlay zone. I know we've got folks to talk about what is an estuary, what does that mean? Moving on quickly, specifically within Muskegon, you have your estuary natural and estuary conservation zones. Within the shoreland overlay zone, it does have specific standards for what is allowed to be developed within the second classification of significant shorelands, which would be shorelands such as the Muskegon Crest wetland area. Communities are unique in that areas that are built and committed or are developed typically have some sort of exception that has been taken to Goal 17, because in most of your communities, if not now, at one point, you did have a higher resource value for the shorelands that are within your areas. One thing that's interesting is that when the state was looking at shorelands, It really started with all lands west of the Oregon Coast Highway. Tillamook does have some exceptions to that. And then taking that down really to our local area, what we identified are lands contiguous with ocean estuaries and coastal lakes that contain the following features, and those include areas subject to ocean flooding and lands within 100 feet of the ocean, adjacent areas of geologic instability, areas for riparian vegetation, significant shoreland and wetland biological habitats. These are areas that are also needed for water dependent and water related uses. These can be on our exceptional aesthetic or scenic quality areas. These would include Proposal Rock specifically, or further north areas like Bay Ocean Spit, your coastal headlands. We still do have some dredge material disposal sites. And so typically, in most cases, uses that are allowed in the underlying zone for a shoreland typically can still happen, except for if they meet one of these significant second classification or categories of shorelands. Typically what we're looking at is low impact development. So this ties back also into our water dependent development, or development for hiking and outdoor recreation that's low intensity and low impact. And oftentimes also our areas where we like to promote educational opportunities. So I'm going to go ahead and stop there just to kind of give you an overview of what we look at. And I'm going to go ahead and turn the floor over to our first panelist, and I am happy to jump in and answer questions later if needed. So I would like to introduce Heather Wade, who is a coastal policy specialist for the Oregon Department of Land Conservation and Development. Welcome, Heather.
Hi there, sorry, technical difficulties. Thanks for having me today. Thanks, Sarah, for giving that overview. I don't have to do that. I feel like that's one of those that I tend to have to give a lot. So I'll keep it short because I think that there are quite a few of us to go, and I think that I'm excited to really hear from everyone else. But so I've been in my position as coastal policy specialist at the Department of Land Conservation and Development now for 2 years. Actually, May 28th was my 2-year anniversary. And it's been a really fun time diving into the complexities of goals 16 and 17. Full transparency, I will not pretend to know all of the local specifics in your community. I'm a Texas girl, but I can talk about the general trends that I have seen since coming back to Oregon and trying to push our estuary and shoreland planning initiatives at DLCD forward. So for over a decade now at DLCD, we have had many different initiatives to try and modernize and push estuary and shorelands planning forward. And some of these efforts include things like modernizing data sets for updating resource inventories. Many estuary plans are significantly out of date and rely on very old data that can be decades old. In some places, maybe there's just a complete lack of data, and so the Oregon Coastal Management Program and DLCD spent quite a bit of effort seeking out grant funding to try to get capacity to actually do some modeling work and develop some data sets using various standards to get the best available data for estuary habitats. And so that took about a decade to finish, and now it's available for use. Maps have been developed coastwide. It's also available online through our coastal atlas. Another initiative that we had was a sea level rise projections project, where we also identified critical infrastructure along shorelands, and specifically looked at different sea level rise scenarios and the types of exposure to flooding that infrastructure would have, and also looking at the extent of estuaries and how that would change over time due to sea level rise. We've also looked at things like trying to assess the effectiveness of the coordination of local estuary permitting with state and federal permitting, because we know that that can be a challenge on all sides. And so trying to look at what are the challenges, how do we improve them. We have tried to work with specific communities to update estuary management plans. And when we say update plans, we don't mean like the little bits here and there and like making small tweaks to certain words. We mean like updating resource inventories and maps and like the big substantial changes. And to this day, we really haven't seen one happen in Oregon. And so that remains to be a challenge, but we're committed and we're working on it. Coos Bay is currently still working on their plan update, and we have officially kicked off a plan update for Yaquina Bay. And so we will continue to do that, and hoping to make some progress. In addition, we received 2 different grants over the last year to do some estuary planning work. One is the Yaquina Bay project that I mentioned, but another is from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, and it is for developing what we're calling estuary resilience action plans. And it's a pilot project that we hope to go coastwide, but for now it will be done in 2 bays. One is in Coos Bay and one is in Tillamook Bay. But the idea is to really focus on natural infrastructure and create a community process to identify priority restoration sites and set up communities for being able to seek out funding to actually implement restoration projects. And so, you know, those are just some examples of the things that we've done. And I thought I would share a little bit about like what I've learned from all of that, because when you come in as an outsider, you kind of have a different perspective. So the first thing is, you can't plan for estuaries and not plan for shorelands. You have to do them together. And sometimes there are people that think they can be done separately. I just don't think that they can be. You have to do them, to me, together. And that's to me what makes sense. When we talk about restoration or hazard mitigation, I think a lot of times the role that land use planning can play can be overlooked, especially when it comes to goals like 16, 17, and even goal 5. And now really is the perfect time to be planning for estuaries and shorelands due to the environmental changes that we continue to see, and the changes that will continue to impact our coastal communities. And I guess with that, I'll leave it, and if there are questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you, Heather. Well, while we wait to see if there's a question, there was a question asked earlier by Sarah that I need to clarify. Sarah, thank you so much. I get so excited talking about this stuff and seeing you guys that I start going too fast and then I miss things. So Sarah, you are correct. Hawk Creek is also part of our shoreland overlay zone, and it has an estuary zoning designation. And the other clarification, real quick, going off a little bit of what Heather shared when she was referencing old data. So Tillamook County's goal elements for shorelands and estuarine areas have not been updated in several years. And so that is something that we would love at some point to be able to do for the county as a whole, which I'm sure will be a monumental task. But with that, when we talk about identification of boundaries of estuaries, or when we talk about locations of shorelines, because the state was very general in the areas of study, right? So the areas of study were very high level. So in an estuary, the boundaries are determined by the language, which falls to, I believe, and Lisa will correct me if I'm wrong, the mean higher high water line. Heather's shaking her head yes, so I'm gonna take that as a win. So while the maps will designate these areas and shade them in the zoning maps, the boundary of that shading is not correct. And as many of you know, especially as we move forward with restoration projects or we look at impacts from development, those lines may adjust over time. And so when we look at where those boundaries are, we have to go farther than the map designation, like we would do for a residential zone. The other thing was shorelands. So in the goal 17 element of the shoreland, the goal 17 shoreland element of the comp plan, those areas that are categorized as significant shoreland areas are actually inventoried by name. And they then are inventoried with a map and tax lot number. And then also, again, the language control that's going to identify that boundary. And so using the Nesco and Crest wetland as an example, it will tell you it is the Nesco and Crest wetlands, and it's going to tell you what sections it's in. But to really identify the boundary, that would require a delineation. So the map itself is not going to be accurate in determining that boundary location. We have to rely on others and consultants and people with that technical expertise to assist us in finding that area. So I hope that adds a little bit more context. And I do not see any questions for Heather, but Heather, don't go anywhere because they might come up later. So thank you very much. It is my pleasure to introduce Lisa Phipps. Lisa is a very familiar and welcome face to the Nescoan community. As many of you know, she spent a lot of time with community development. There was a lot that I actually learned from this exceptional planner and lady, spent a lot of years together. And Lisa, since community development, has moved on to a few other careers, including where she is now, which she is the North Coast Regional Representative for DLCD. So she's still very much part of Tillamook County, but just in a different role. So welcome, Lisa, and please correct me on anything that I said that was not right.
No, it all sounded good, Sarah.
Okay.
I appreciate the opportunity to be here. Heather hit the high points of DLCD's current projects around estuaries and sort of our general approach to estuaries and shorelands. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about my experience and hope that it helps contribute to the conversation this evening. So I was the coastal resource planner for 9 years, and I would say estuaries are us is what it felt like for 9 years. There's a lot of nuance in our goal 16 in it's been 12 years since I've been with the department. There's a lot of nuance in the Tillamook County comprehensive plan and land use ordinances for that matter around goal 16 and 17. And partly because goal 17 is an overlay. So it's often overlooked, not by staff, but by people coming in for applications. It just doesn't feel like it has a relevancy for whatever reason I suspect that's because the estuarine goals are fairly clear cut. There's standards, there's development processes, there's criteria in place to, you know, meet a development permit standard. And then you have the shoreland overlay zone, which feels a little nebulous and it's unclear for folks that aren't used to using it about why you would why it would count, you know, why it would apply to a coastal lake, and it does. Why it would apply to a coastal wetland, and it does, you know, because when you think of shoreland, you automatically think, I believe, of the ocean front. I think people automatically go to the coastline of the beach and say that must be what it applies to. So that's, I'm sure, going to be part of some of the questions this evening. The other piece around the development within estuaries is Oregon is pretty unique in that we treat our estuaries with zoning, much like we use on land. So you have specific estuary management units in the major estuaries, which have the list of allowable uses, conditional uses, you know, and then those that aren't allowed at all. And treating it that way comes with some pros and cons. Pros is it sets up some level of certainty for people who are looking at some kind of a development associated with those areas. At the same time, it locks in an estuary which is not lockable. So estuaries are dynamic systems. Millgrass beds move, resources move, and so it doesn't the land use designation doesn't always coincide with what's actually happening in the landscape at that time. And so like Sarah was mentioning, you know, when you're talking about what are the boundaries of the estuary, well, it's the mean or high water line, or the line of non-aquatic vegetation, which is, it can be even further removed from where you would traditionally think of like a riparian setback. And so it's a dynamic system trying to be monitored by a very static system, which is land use. And so the best part of all of this is that the best available information can go a long ways towards assisting communities and people coming in with proposals to address those concerns. There's also so much oversight in estuaries from other agencies that the counties, you know, just that one piece. But, and I'll say this till I quit breathing, it's often also the piece that seems to people to be, oh, it's just a county permit. But that's the beauty of land use in Oregon, is that at the end of the day, it really is it starts at the local level. And so dismissing the local jurisdiction when all others have to comply with it through the Coastal Zone Management Program, agencies have to be in alignment with local comprehensive plans. And so in order for them to make decisions, ultimately, without that local approval, nothing can move forward. And so there's a lot of opportunity to overlook that, and it comes at great cost sometimes to folks coming in to look at doing any kind of development. So so I was the Coastal Resource Planner. I was with the Tillamook Estuaries Partnership for 9 years, and I have been with the Department of Land Conservation and Development as the North Coast Regional Rep. So I went from very specific to much more generalized as a regional rep, and I still have my fingers in the pots of all the coastal goals, which is what keeps me interested and forever engaged in land use. So I'm sure there will be many questions. We got a nice list of them beforehand. So we're kind of prepared, I think, and I will pass it on to the next person, Sarah.
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you for that. And you know, you touched on something that's really important also, in that we have a lot of people that will come to our office and they say, well, I had to get a DSL Army Corps permit. I already had to have a state and federal review. Why do I have to do this as well? And it's exactly for the reasons that Lisa stated. These are always coordinated reviews. They're supposed to be done together and in partnership to make sure that we're all in compliance with the Coastal Zone Management Act, basically, right? Down from the local level all the way up to the state and federal level for these development proposals. Mark Lyman asked a question. Thank you, Mark. So he asked, does that mean that the shoreland maps do not accurately represent the actual areas? So Mark, we do have some maps that are part of our comp plan element. And for those of you that might be interested in staying on when we're done, if there's time, I'm happy to show you how to find those inventories in the comp plan. I think a lot of times people focus on the land use ordinance and they forget there's this other document there that actually contains a lot of what we're talking about this evening. So more to come on that. Thank you, Lisa. Next, I'd like to introduce Christy Foster. Christy is the Executive Director of the Tillamook Estuaries Partnership. This last year, I've especially had an opportunity to work closely with Christy on many estuary partnership efforts. And we welcome you, Christy. Thank you for joining us. Maybe one of the first questions you could answer as part of your presentation is, what exactly is an estuary?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you. Chris, would you be able to let me share my screen with everybody? And while you're doing that, I can let folks know that an estuary is where the rivers meet the sea. So that's pretty much the simplest way of explaining what an estuary is. So can you all see my screen right now? All right, I'm going to go ahead and start this slideshow. Oops. So this is just a general overview of what Tillamook Estuaries is. This is a presentation that I gave to some of the new staff that's coming in to work with the Environmental Protection Agency, and they wanted to know a little bit more about who we are. So we are a nonprofit environmental organization. We are not a regulatory agency. We're not part of the government. We exist because the people within Tillamook County saw that we had declining salmon populations and other concerns within Tillamook County. And so Tillamook Bay was nominated to become a bay of national significance about 25 years ago. And in response to that, we were granted that, that designation. And we are now one of 28 locations within the National Estuary Program. So there are 2 National Estuary Programs in Oregon. One is the Lower Columbia Estuary Partnership, and Tillamook is the second one. So while we started looking at just Tillamook Bay, over the years, our scope has expanded so that now we look at all 5 estuaries within Tillamook County. So we're looking at 3 primary focus areas where we do our work. And we're a small staff. We have only about 10 people working with us, and not all of them are employees. Some of them are shared positions, some of them are interns, but there are 10 of us in total, and we look at water quality issues, habitat restoration, and community education and engagement. And this is a beautiful picture of Tillamook Bay, and so I'm trying to wow you guys with just how beautiful our parts of our county are. So I mentioned clean water quality monitoring. We look at clean water and climate preparedness. And so 3 major things that we're working on right now, although this isn't all of what we're working on, is that we do water quality monitoring. So every 2 weeks, we have volunteers from around the county that go and sample at a number of creeks, bays, and river inlets. And they bring these samples back to us at our office in Garibaldi, and we run these samples for bacteria. And so there are samples that are coming to us from Nesquin, from Sand Lake, from Nesucca, and some other locations. We've been running these samples every 2 weeks for over 20 years. And what we're able to do now is within, the sample processing takes about 24 hours, but then we input our results into a database that will allow you to access almost real-time results as far as the quality and cleanliness of your water with respect to bacteria levels. So you can go on our website and look at our interactive map and see if there's an area where you would like to go recreate. You can check the water quality there and see if it's good, it'll pop up green. If it's bad, it'll pop up red. And then over time, every 2 years, we do an analysis of the status and trends of the water quality in the area. So where you see yellow with a line across it, that means that it's stabilized. If you see a downward arrow, that means that there might be some degradation occurring. Where there's green and a plus or an upward arrow, that means there's water quality improvements. And so this is something that you can access anytime just by going on our website. Another area of water quality monitoring that we do is we're looking at ocean acidification. And this is something that we're seeing as an impact of climate change. And so we are working with the Environmental Protection Agency group that's out of Newport to do some baseline studies in the Tillamook Bay area. And what's happening is that the oceans are getting just slightly more acidic, and this is starting to impact some of the shell production in shellfish. And so we want to make sure that we understand what's happening and we can hopefully be responsive to it. So this is a beginning of this is York Johnson. He is one of our employees, and they just deployed the instrumentation within the last couple of weeks. So they go through the summer season trying to see what changes in pH levels or acidity that we're seeing in the bay. And then we also look at plastic pollution. And this is something that if you are interested in doing, once some of the COVID restrictions are lifted a little bit more, we can start having volunteers assist us with it. But we have folks that will go walk along the beach and look for these little plastic bits that are called nurdles. And it's a real simple procedure. It only takes about 5 minutes. And we do this once a month, but we can do as many locations as we'd like. And if we find any nurdles, then there is a national database that we enter that data into. This is something that our other national estuary programs are working on, and we're trying to just see what the conditions are throughout the country. Next thing that we work on is habitat restoration and critical infrastructure. So we will do restoration projects such as tidal floodplain reconnections. We're really kind of focused on salmon habitat. That is kind of where we get the majority of our grant funding to do our restoration work. And so we will also work on fish passage barrier removals. And so this is part of the salmon superhighway. And you can see how we take kind of failing old undersized culverts and we will replace them with modern fish passage. In this particular instance that I'm showing you, it ended up being a bridge. Sometimes it might be a larger culvert or it might be something else. And what we're trying to make sure of is that the fish can get to their traditional spawning grounds or overwintering areas, and we're trying to remove these blockages. So this is something that you may hear a little bit more about when the Watershed Council tells you about some of the work that they do. We will also put large wood into streams, and this will create habitat for the salmon. We work with the lumber companies, the timber companies, and sometimes when they have excess lumber from some of their projects, we can we can utilize that, and we'll partner with them and put those in areas where we find will have the biggest impact on improving salmon habitat. And we also have what we call our backyard planting program. So this is also some of the restoration work that we do. So if you take a look at this before picture, this is somebody's property that has a salmon-bearing river or creek or stream on it. And you can see that the vegetation is really pretty low. And so what can happen then is there can be a lot of erosion, can be land loss for the landowner. And there can also be, because of the erosion, increased, excuse me, sedimentation in the stream, which can impact the salmon habitat. So for this particular program, when we find willing landowners, we'll go out and get grant funding to remove any invasive vegetation that might be here, like blackberry or other things. And we will plant that with native plants so that over time, and you can see how beautiful it becomes in the after picture, not only does this help stabilize the shore banks and decrease the erosion, and the different heights of the plants will create shade on the stream and cool the water temperatures, which is also good for the fish. And we also have a native plant nursery. So these various restoration projects that we work on, we have a native plant nursery that has over 100,000 plants that are coastally adapted and genetically appropriate for where we work. We don't only use them for ourselves, we work with 40 other partners in 8 counties up and down the northern Oregon coast. And so we will provide this material for many of the habitat restoration projects that go on between all of these different partners. Our native plant nursery is located near the Air Museum in the Port of Tillamook, and it's adjacent to the Oregon Youth Authority. And so the incarcerated youth, when they reach their pretty much their last year of incarceration, and if they've passed a lot of different merit levels, then they can come out and work in our native plant nursery and learn job skills, social skills, and kind of get them a little bit of experience before they're reintegrated back into the civilian lifestyle. So we are really super happy to be able to partner with the Oregon Youth Authority as well. For our community education and engagement, what we try to do is create a sense of place for residents and for visitors. And this is a picture of Kilges Point Reserve. And we do a variety of kindergarten through 12th grade science, technology, engineering, and math education. We have 2 landmark outdoor learning experiences. One is for 3rd graders and one is for 4th graders, where we get every single kid in the whole county, all 3 school districts. We also invite private schools and homeschooled children to come to our field trips. And we're trying to give the kids an idea of what it means to be in an estuary. You know, what are the birds doing? What are the bugs doing? How does water affect their lives? And so we have been doing this for over 20 years. So an entire generation of Tillamook County school children have gone through our programs. And during COVID, when we weren't able to do field trips, we transitioned to virtual. And so we had virtual programming this year and developed several videos for the kiddos so that we can still show those in future years, and people can go on our website or our YouTube channel and watch them just for fun. We have a, well, here are some photos of our kiddos looking at the different things that we've got going on. We also partner with 7 other organizations for a program called Explore Nature. And Explore Nature is a series of guided hikes, walks, paddles, and stewardship activities. So when we don't have the COVID restrictions, we can invite people to come out and experience all sorts of places throughout the county, whether it might be a mushroom hike or nature photography or in this case, the photos that I've been showing you have been seed detectives, and that's where we take folks out. We'll teach them a little bit about plant identification, and then they actually help us gather seeds that we take back to our nursery and grow into the plants. So that's a wonderful opportunity. Normally our programs run from March through November. We've had to put many of them on hold because of COVID, but we're hoping that next year we'll bring that program back. And these are all free. If you just get online and look up Tillamook or Explore Nature Tillamook Coast, you'll be able to find those calendars. We also have access to them on our website. Another past project that we did was our water trail guide series, and we provide these to anybody who asks for them. They're also in PDF version on our website, and what this will do is it provides maps for non-motorized water sports. It also provides a lot of historical and cultural information, and it's just a way to try to connect the restoration work we do with the restoration or with the recreation that people love, so that people can do some responsible and sustainable recreation in our county. We work with veterans. We are part of the VetWorks program, which is a branch of AmeriCorps, and so we get two. They call them interns, but they're much more experienced than interns. So these are military veterans who are transitioning back to the civilian workforce and are interested in natural resources. They come work for us for 10.5 months and gain really valuable work skills and get to participate in a lot of different restoration activities and kind of figure out what direction they want to focus their careers. And it's been a really positive experience for us. And the last thing I have on here is that we are actually hoping to build an estuary interpretive center, and we're still in the feasibility phase of this project. It's something that if it goes through, we're hoping to build this in Garibaldi, and we would have a place for people to come learn all about the estuaries and the work that we do. So that's kind of an overview of Tillamook Estuaries Partnership, and I will try to answer any questions that people have. And thank you for your attention and for inviting me to be here. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Christy. Great presentation. So we did have one question. So what do you feel is the trend in overall estuary quality? Maybe that could be focused to Tillamook County, but you know, taking a minute or two, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, with respect to the water quality, I can say that the trend is it's improving. We are very happy to see that a lot of the private landowners and the different industries that are around here are very proactive in trying to make sure that we're not having contaminants get into the waterways. And if there is a problem, then they're very good at trying to remedy those problems. So we're seeing like the Wilson River has been in compliance for years and years, and we're seeing other sections of the rivers that are also showing long-term improvements. So that's all really good news.
Wonderful, thank you. Thank you very much, and thank you again for the presentation. Sarah Webster did send a message to you specifically.
Okay.
So I'll let you go ahead and respond to that and to keep the conversation moving. So our last two panelists both represent the Nestucca, Nescawency Lake Watershed Council. They have been with us before. They are both experts and professionals in their field, and they have made countless contributions to both the community of Nescowen and the surrounding areas. So first, it is my pleasure to introduce Guy Sievers, who is the board director. So Guy, we can go ahead and start with you. And then if you would like to include Garsha, who is the council coordinator, that's fine. If you guys would like to do something together, or Guy, if you want to take the floor, then Garsha, then you can take over when Guy's done.
Well, we flipped a coin and Gersha lost, so he's going to go first. And I think and do a presentation, then I'll be available for any questions I think after.
Wonderful. Thank you, Guy. So Garsha, please, thank you for joining us tonight.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. Hey, everybody. My name is Garsha Amidi. I'm the coordinator for the Nestucca, Neskowin, and Sand Lake Watersheds Council. As Sarah alluded to, we've been to these town halls a couple times. We gave a presentation called, what is a watershed? What is a watershed council? And, how can folks in Neskowin work with us? And that's on our YouTube page, and it pretty well explains what our watershed council does. So I don't have a presentation to follow up Christie's amazing presentation about everything that TEP does. I was planning on focusing on Neskowin a little bit and pointing to you some resources about the estuary, more from a natural resources perspective rather than a planning and zoning perspective. I'm going to leave that planning and all that other stuff to Sarah and other folks to talk about. But so right off the bat, I guess just very broadly, our Watershed Council is a nonprofit that implements voluntary watershed restoration projects. Our restoration projects both benefit fish and wildlife, but they also benefit economic development in South Tillamook County. The area we work in is Sand Lake Estuary Basin. We work in the Nestucca Basin and the Little Nestucca Basin, and down here in Neskowin. And we work with federal, state, and local agencies, and our board is community driven. And so we have community members on our board and a large outreach and education program that we engage folks with. And Chris Lady made a comment. We are currently working with the community and the county on the Neskowin Emergency Egress Project. And this project is sort of on the border of the estuary zone, and we're really happy to be a partner with the county on it. And the project is going really well so far, so we thank everybody for that. So back to Neskowin, some resources that I'd like to point you to, and our Watershed Council can provide these resources to you. On our other town hall, we also made these resources available. But we have the Salmon Neskowin Watershed Analysis, the Nestucca Neskowin Watershed Analysis, Tillamook Estuary Partnerships CCMP, which is a management plan that Christy might be able to talk about a little bit more, and the Nestucca Bay National Wildlife Refuge, their comprehensive conservation plan, and also the Neskowin area flooding and fish passage assessment. I can put together a document and point you all to these resources, but these are great resources to get an idea of sort of the natural resources inventory of the estuary zone, and also of the more upland watershed. So as I was saying earlier, just from a natural resources perspective, these documents all sort of agree in that they define the estuary zone, sort of going from the beach. As Christy said, it's sort of the mixing of the saltwater and the freshwater. And so it's basically how far up that saltwater wedge extends inland up our rivers and streams. And so particularly in Neskowin, it'll be up. And again, as Sarah and Lisa and everybody was saying, these are dynamic systems. So this is basically at the time of writing these documents, this is where they define the estuary. So up Hawk Creek, or up Hawk Creek, basically to those Butte Creek tide gates around there, and then also up Neskowin Creek up to into the Proposal Rock neighborhood, up Sutton Creek a little bit, but also beyond Sutton Creek, up Neskowin Creek. And so those are the very sort of broad, more natural resources definition of where our estuary is. So our Watershed Council does implement estuary restoration projects. We don't have any in Nescoin right now, aside from that egress project. We have a project on the Nestucca Bay National Wildlife Refuge that involves tie gate replacement, some channel remeandering, and large wood placement in the estuary zone to promote fish habitat. And then in the Sand Lake estuary, we are working with TEP for a tidal reconnection and fish passage project. Agencies that we often work with are, and we consult these agencies as early as possible in the project. We work hand in hand with Tillamook County Community Development when we're implementing estuary projects. And as they said earlier, all of these other agencies are looped into Tillamook County. So, that county sign off is going to be ultimately probably the most important one, but other agencies involved are the Army Corps of Engineers, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, Department of State Lands. We work with Fish and Wildlife Service and NOAA on sort of biological opinions and programmatics. And we consult ODF and W. If you have a development project, I also encourage contacting ODF and W to learn more about sort of the fish and wildlife that are going to be impacted by a development project that you might be interested in. And we also go through archaeology, so we're working with the Historic Preservation Office. So we think it's important that our fish maps are updated, that our essential salmonid habitat as defined by DSL, that these maps are updated. So if you know of a stream that does have fish use and it's not, the fish maps don't define it as fish use, then that might be an important conversation to have with agencies, and you can bring this up with our Watershed Council as well. And so this is important because when you're looking at a salmon bearing stream, it's important to know sort of what sort of fish use is involved, and also what sort of permits you're going to need to go through, especially if there's coho use in that stream. For the future, our Watershed Council, we're going to be working on updating our inventories. We hope to get some new fresh fish data in our watersheds, especially in Nescoin. And so this might be a project that happens over the next couple of years. So we're talking about sort of fish abundance data, spawner surveys and things like that. They're called rapid bioassessments. Our last one was conducted in the mid-2000s, so I think we're going to be needing to do one sometime in the near future. And lastly, water quality monitoring is going to be really important. Christy talked about TEP's water quality monitoring program, and we are sort of piggybacking on their program a little bit and expanding into tributaries in our basins. And so we have a grant from the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board, and we're also working with DEQ, and TEP has also been instrumental in setting up our program, with working with York Johnson and Christy on that. And so we are going to be expanding our program in Nescoin to capture multiple points in the village area. It's especially important for bacteria. And so we'll be looking at sort of this estuary water quality in the estuary zone. And so we'll be looking at bacteria, specifically fecal coliforms. In other parts of our watersheds, we're looking at both bacteria and temperature, but Nescoin is not temperature limited, so we're sort of focusing on bacteria. I think that's pretty much what I have for now. I know I covered a lot of stuff. In the future, I think invasives control is going to be really important for Nescoin as well. We have a lot of gorse in Lincoln City on the beach bluffs. And so it'll be important working with our Watershed Council and Soil and Water Conservation District to keep an eye on invasives, both on that beach zone and in the estuary as well. And I think that just about covers everything that I wanted to talk about. I know that's sort of a lot of stuff. I threw a lot of stuff out there, but I think that's sort of the main important things that I wanted to cover.
Thank you, Garsha. We do have one question, but I'm actually going to hold it until Guy is finished because it's probably something that maybe a group answer Q&A to. So Guy,
Yeah, no, I have, and again, my name is Guy Sievers, and I'm the president of the Nestucca-Nesco and Sand Lake Watershed Council. And I think Gershaw covered it all, and we've already done another presentation on our Watershed Council and projects we do around here, so we don't need to repeat all that. We are pretty excited about as we look to the results of what were the project on the egress road. When we, as a Watershed Council, came together with Tillamook County Public Works to make that a combination emergency egress and fish passage project, that was really key. For us, in the Watershed Council, it addresses two major streams, critical fish habitat that both contain endangered species and coho, salmon and steelhead, both on Butte Creek and Hawk Creek. So we're excited as both because Nescoin will have an emergency egress, we can start with that, but also because we're going to really improve the fish habitat in these two streams and connect with projects that we're doing, both in terms of Butte Creek and projects that we're doing on the east side of 101 that include projects that deal with the fish barriers, fish passage barriers on Sunbow Road, potentially on the culvert under 101 on Butte Creek. Hawk Creek, we are looking at, we've got a grant for a Beaver Management program, which we think when implemented might greatly help with the area on the east side of 101, the property where the Tate's property where the farmers market is. We're hoping that Beaver Management program that we just got a grant for will help that and help with some of the problems that the beavers have caused on the east side, as well as in the refuge, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Refuge on the west side of 101. So that's another project that'll impact us in the estuary and the shoreland area. So that's about it for me.
Thank you, Guy. Much appreciated. So I'm going to jump back to Kevin's question and definitely start with you, Guy and Garsha, and then if any of the other panelists would like to join in the conversation. And the question is can any of the panelists discuss the Nescoin Golf Course? It's a great community resource. However, it represents a significant loss of valuable habitat and a potential vector for chemical contamination.
God, do you want me to chime in?
Well, I don't know if anyone, I was waiting to hear if anyone from the golf course was on.
Oh, yeah.
I could say that, you know, the mission of the Watershed Council and kind of we always keep in the back of our heads is we're about working lands. And, you know, we're not, we do restoration, conservation, environmental work, but we're not, we don't exist to put people out of work or to stop legitimate business activities farm, forest activities, whatever. So for instance, we work very closely with dairy farmers in our watersheds. We believe that working together, and I think you heard Christy say about the water quality improvements that are happening, and we find that people are very cooperative in working with us in terms of protecting water quality, fish habitat, and whatever. And so we approach it in a way that we want to work together to make sure that people are able to work and play and within our watersheds, and also that we're going to have productive systems for fish and wildlife. Same goes with the golf course. We've talked with the golf course every year that I've been part of the board. We've found them to be very cooperative, open to the ideas we've had. Certainly Butte Creek and what's happening there is an important component of our work with them. They were very involved in this current egress road project, agreeing to remove the tide gates, which is going to greatly improve the habitat for fish. That was a golf course agreed to that removal, even though it may mean occasionally some flooding on their golf course especially during the summer. And we found them in general to be responsive. Now, I don't know if Kevin knows of anything particular that they're doing on the golf course. But I know that they've taken it seriously in terms of their management of the course. I don't know about their use of chemicals or anything like that. That's nothing that anybody shared with us. So.
And thank you, Guy. And I would offer two things for that too. And Mark has touched on these in the chat. So one, the golf course has been there for a very long time, right? Actually, prior to the development of our land use program for the county. But then also, it also ties back into the other conversations we've had about recreational benefits to communities too. And really, is there a balance that can be achieved to where you have this great recreational amenity, but you can do work within that recreation area? And I think the Nescoin Emergency Egress Project is a great example of trying to balance and create a space where you're promoting water quality, flood function, fish habitat, but you're also allowing an existing recreational amenity that's also important to the community to coexist within that area.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Let's see. So Tim asked, who is responsible for maintenance of Nescoin Creek and Hawk Creek in regard to debris management as a result of storm surge? That's a great question too. I honestly don't know the answer to that question. And Director Chris Lady has, I believe he had to run. Guy or Garsha, or I would say even Lisa or Heather, if you have any comments about maybe a state role, because especially when it comes to logs and other debris, there are limitations of what can be removed or added or where it can go.
I do know that this is Guy again. I do know that at times the County Public Works Department has removed very large root wads that have either come up against the Salem Street Bridge and created a safety hazardous situation at the bridge. I think those of us who've been around Nescoin for a while, remember the cranes that had to be brought in to remove those root wads. I know that when we do get flooding from the Salem Street Bridge north on Hawk Creek, and some of that woody debris gets deposited on the road and up McMinnville, up to 100 feet or more up McMinnville, that Public Works has removed, and some of the local folks too have just taken upon themselves to remove the debris. And I know that there's been a lot of discussion about what's the best way to prevent flooding when we get a storm surge up especially Hawk Creek, although I know it's also been somewhat of an issue in South Beach when we've had some flooding over there. but seems not recently. But anyways, but Hawk Creek, to remove the woody debris from Hawk Creek, there will be multiple agencies involved, and the Division of State Lands is the one who has primary authority, but you're also dealing with ESA listed stream, and so you would have NOAA fisheries and U.S. Oregon Fish and Wildlife involved and other agencies. So it's not an easy issue to resolve, and I do know that Chris Lady has had a lot of conversations with people in the community about maybe taking advantage of all the heavy equipment we have now doing the egress road and just cleaning out Hawk Creek, that would prevent some flooding. But it would take, as I said, multiple agency approval. You'd have to go through some proof that woody debris is the cause of the flooding. And I mean, some of it's common sense, but as you know, Sarah, common sense doesn't actually go a long way sometimes in proving things with agencies. Yeah, as of now, it's Public Works has responded to when it becomes a safety issue and blocking the road or threatening the bridge.
Thank you, Guy. Lisa, do you have anything quickly you'd like to add to that? No? Okay. So Tim asked about, does the new egress road construction include woody debris management? So Chris and Randall, maybe at a future point, we could have a meeting just to talk about the status or more in depth about that project itself, especially as it ties back to these goal elements. I think that'd be a great conversation. To answer Tim's question quickly, the answer is yes. There is a restoration and habitat enhancement plan that has been folded into the construction design for the Nescoin emergency egress route. My guess is that the Watershed Council and others are also intimately involved in that. So, and Randall and Chris, I think that concludes our questions. So just quickly, I would wrap up to say, yes.
Sarah, real quick, a question came in to me via email, and it relates to tax lot 1900. Apparently it was acquired back by the county in the 1930s and has been set aside by the county for recreational use. So I think the question is whether or not the county could legally rescind the existing recreational use classification and potentially sell it.
So this is the old platted Kiwanda Shores or some area that's all been vacated. So that would require a public process to rezone it and could potentially require some goal exceptions, because currently as it is zoned with comp plan policies specifically related to goal 18 and also areas of the Nescoin Coastal Hazards Overlay Zone, something like residential development at this time would not be allowed. So that it would be quite an uphill process for the county to even consider something like that. And of course, we would have to work very closely with DLCD and others to even consider what that process could look like. So the short answer is arbitrarily, no. Are there several mechanisms in place that really limit the scope of what type of activities and development can happen there? Yes, very much so.
Sarah, am I right in that lot is zoned recreation management?
It's zoned recreation natural.
Recreation natural.
Yes. Lisa.
Which even limits it more in terms of development.
Correct. Yeah, it gets back to that low intensity type development, if anything could be allowed, but it's not a yes or no answer. There's a lot of policies and a lot of layers that would go into any consideration for that area. Right. Lisa, did you have something you wanted to add to that?
So Sarah, this was one of the questions we got in advance. And so I'd been thinking about it a little bit. And the follow-up to that question is how can it be protected even beyond the recreation natural zone. And the response is that within that question, someone had offered the idea of a conservation easement in perpetuity. And that would certainly do it if that was where the county, as the owner, of course, they're the ones that are the owner for that property. But if that were something that someone, that the county wanted to pursue, that's definitely one way to go about doing it.
Thank you, Lisa. And I know that the community feels very passionately about this area within the community. I would also say that, again, nothing can be arbitrarily changed with respect to zoning or any policies or overlay zones or other types of comp plan layers that fall within that property and the proper. There's two of them there actually. They're both tax lot 1900. The other piece to that is any type of development would have to meet a set of standards and criteria. So it's not just a matter of deciding I'm going to go do X on this property, right? And so, for those of you that are very concerned about that, there's always a process in place. Even for the work that we're talking about tonight, like restoration efforts, there's always a process, and there's multiple partners, both public and private, that are needed to successfully complete those processes and those projects. And it includes our councils and the estuary partnership in their areas. It requires DLCD and of course community development to take a look. But it's a great partnership. And again, I think the Nescoin emergency egress route is really a shining example of how through public-private partnerships, we can all come together as one community with all of you included to achieve a really important goal. And so, Chris, just to wrap up my part, because I know we're getting close to 7:30, and like I said, I'm happy to show folks, or at least show Chris and Randall, the both of you, where those elements have all of those inventories contained within our comp plans. But why are these areas within our communities, why are they part of our comprehensive plan? Why do we create policies, and why do we have zoning designation for these areas? Well, and it's simple. It's because these mechanisms preserve scenic beauty within your communities, those natural features that you all treasure. It protects significant wetland and biological habitat for our fish and our birds, animals, and other organisms that we may or may not see within our ecosystems. It helps promote water-dependent development and recreation, because that's also a huge part of our communities that we all enjoy. And also, lastly, and equally as important, these policies and goals and zoning designations help with enhancement and restoration of naturally sensitive areas that help promote water quality, fish habitat, and flood function. So they're very important to your community. So those are my parting words. Thank you.
Right, Sarah, wanted to thank you and all the presenters, and thank everyone else for their great questions. I mentioned earlier that a link to this session will be posted on our Nescoin CAC website as part of our community planning effort. So thanks everyone for their time. Have a good evening.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Thanks, Chris, for hosting.